Well, welcome to everyone. This week we have another Syriac reading, and the reader is a great friend of mine, Bob Kitchen, who has done a lot of translation of Syriac texts. He's one of the great translators for Syriac of our time, and we all owe him a great debt. And he's going to talk about a very interesting text that he'll introduce, which has to do with the sayings of the Desert Fathers, but this is in fact a commentary on them. So I think without further ado, Robert, I shall pass over to you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and I appreciate the invitation from all of you. It's been a wonderful series so far, and a very creative one in terms of the format. Yes, I'm going to talk today about a different character in the Syriac world from the Church of the East. In today's geopolitical religious perception or perspective, you might say, it may seem congruous that the oil-rich peninsula of Qatar and its surrounding regions were a dominantly Christian stronghold in the 7th century. In 2014, a conference was held at the University of Qatar in Doha on the Christian and Syriac writers of Qatar. It was organized by Mario Koza of the American University of Beirut. And the fruits of the sessions were surprising and remarkable, and 2 thick volumes of the papers and texts have been published by Gorgias Press. There were a good handful of Syriac authors from Qatar, and I'm only going to mention 4 of them. There are several others that are included in these anthologies. Ahob, a biblical commentator, Gabriel, a liturgical commentator and scholar. Perhaps the most famous of Syriac writers in general is Isaac of Nineveh, who's the most widely translated and distributed Syriac author. His works, in fact, are included in the Greek and the later Slavonic Philokalia. This, of course, Nevsky Everett's presentation in this series was on Isaac of Nineveh. And not last, but at least the last one I'm going to mention is Dadisho of Qatar, who lived in the late 7th century. And he, of course, is the focus of our study today. As the case is with many of these personalities, very little is known about Dadisho, except that, like Isaac, he had come from Qatar and became associated with the monastery of Rabban Shabur. His literary output consists of 4 known works: a commentary on the Asceticon of Abba Isaiah of Scetis, a treatise on the practice of Shelia, which is sometimes translated as stillness. It's the highest level of contemplative prayer in the East Syriac tradition. And in this work, he centers on the ultimate, you might say, accomplishment or achievement of this form of prayer in the test of the 7 weeks of solitude. A third is a letter to Abkosh, a monk who is asking for further counsel regarding, again, this Shelia contemplative prayer. And finally, a commentary on the Paradise of the Fathers. Paradise of the Fathers was compiled by another East Syrian monk, Inanisho, earlier in the 7th century. Now, this latter work, the commentary on the Paradise of the Fathers, is Dadisho's longest work. It includes in it it's an anthology of these Desert Father stories. It includes Palladius's Laziac history, the history of the monks in Egypt, and many stories from the Apophthegmata Patrum. All of these foundational works in the in the Paradise, and also including the Asceticon of Abba Isaiah, were originally composed in Greek, but soon were translated into Syriac. Dadisho's commentary on the Paradise is not short, as you may have guessed. Its format consisted of 399 question and answer units, divided into two parts. Part 1 had 180 questions and answers, and Part 2 had 291. The English translation stretches all the way to 400 pages. The brothers and monks would ask a question, usually stemming, we can see from the content of them, from the reading of the Paradise and the saying of the Desert Fathers. They would ask things like, why did Abba so-and-so say this in this situation? What did he mean by that term? And sometimes the brothers simply ask the traditional questions of how do we achieve this level of prayer? About a dozen times, the brothers would also ask, how many teachers were called so-and-so? All of these were then answered by the Saba, the old man or the elder. And actually, in the best manuscript that David Phillips has developed a critical edition, the best manuscript that Sebastian actually directed us to in Baghdad, has Dadisho himself being the responder in the majority of answers. He would offer an explanation of the saying in question, sometimes with a short reply, and sometimes with a lengthy dissertation, going off on tangents he felt applicable to the monastic lifestyle he was attempting to foster. And I think some of us understand how this happens. Sometimes he would actually answer the brother's question. But as a whole, these questions and answers constructed a virtual manual in the nurturing of the monastic life. It was not systematic in the modern sense, but meant to be used as a primer for novice monks, a kind of lexicon of the problems and solutions of the monastic life by which the monk could express his ambitions and dilemmas. In a sense, it gave him, the monk, a vocabulary by which to explore and to solve the problems he was having. The commentary on the Paradise found rapid acceptance across confessional lines. It was translated first into Arabic, and then there was a Garshuni translation, which is Arabic language in Syriac script. We find sections of it in Sogdian, which is a Turkish language written in a style of Syriac script, which we find primarily on the Silk Road on the way to China. And then finally, in the second millennium, from Arabic into Ge'ez, or Ethiopic. Now, all of these translations were not transmitted under the authorship of Dadisho, but they were sent out as being written by Philoxenus of Mabug, Philoxius in the Ge'ez version. And there's no answer specifically to it, but most likely it was because Dadisho was from the Church of the East. He was a Nestorian, pejoratively, a heretic to the Miaphysite readers of this text. The Miaphysites had no problem with the pastoral content. That's why, of course, they were reading it and wanted it translated. They just had a problem with a heretic being the author. So we have found manuscripts that you can see that the name Dadisho was rubbed out, and Philoxenus, one of the foremost theologians of the Miaphysite movement, was, of course, eminently acceptable for the occasion. The other major difference between the original Syriac and its translations is that the Arabic and Ge'ez versions consist of only 245 question and answer units. So there's a significant condensation. Some of it is explainable. Historical references for 7th century Syriac Christians made no sense to 13th century Ethiopians and were deleted, as well as the trivia questions. How many people were named Macarius? But that does not account for many others, and so there's still work to be done in analyzing these editorial choices. Particularly in the Ethiopian church, the commentary became part of the Ethiopic Book of the Three Monks. And this Book of the Three Monks became the basic textbook for all Ethiopian novice monks, even to this day. They were expected, however, to memorize the entire text, which can be readily seen in the manuscript traditions with innumerable minor variants in content, spelling. As a scholar told me once that this was a nightmare in which to create a critical edition. Philoxenus, of course, is the author of the first book, The First Monk. He certainly paid great attention and affection to the monks and monasteries under his supervision. The second, no surprise, is Isaac of Nineveh. And the third was John of Daliatha, or as he's sometimes called, John Saba, John the Elder. The irony remains that all three authors were Church of the East, providing this staunchly Miaphysite Ethiopian church with the basics of the monastic life. Okay, so that's just a general view of who Dadisho is in his context and this very different style of spiritual work. I have chosen 5 relatively short question and answer units for us to read and examine. But given the diversity of the material, this is no way representative of the kinds of issues that are raised. But what I've chosen, I hope, demonstrate the practical and earthy way of life in which a monk has to be engaged. There is an unanswerable question with which to consider regarding the entire work. Are these question and answer units actual, can we say, live dialogues that took place between monks and the elder? Or did Dadisho create these questions in order to supply the answers he felt were necessary for spiritual growth? Okay, so if you have available, you can follow along with me the questions. I start them off, or I have them listed according to the part of the book and the number of the question and answer units. So the very first one is from part 1, the 27th unit. So the brothers, and they almost all begin with the brothers, ache in Syriac. Why did the cheerful Abba Macarius not spit upon the ground for 60 years, from when he received baptism until he died? All of these, by the way, will be answered by Dadisho. Dadisho responds, on account of the honor of the body and blood of our Lord, which he received, and according to the rest of his extraordinary labors. He also did this by the fervor of his love toward Christ, in that he had not spit upon the ground from the mouth in which he ate and drank the body and blood of Christ. Hence, those were reproved who, upon taking the holy elements, and while its taste was still in their mouth and the morsels of bread in their teeth, they spit upon the ground in the temple before onlookers, not being in awe of our Lord, nor in reverence before people. Before they take the Eucharistic bread or water and rinse their mouth and swallow, they would casually and rashly cast their spit upon the ground while the taste of the body and blood of our Lord is still mixed in it. The fathers, therefore, warned us, saying that once a person takes the holy mysteries, he should not spit it all upon the ground until he eats or drinks. But if the saliva rises up in him, he should swallow it. And if he has some kind of illness and coughs and phlegm rises up, he shall force himself to swallow it. May it be remembered that the blessed Macarius did not spit upon the ground for 60 years. But if one loathes the idea of swallowing his saliva, he might wipe it either on his head or on his beard or on his body until he eats or drinks something. I hope that was properly edifying to all of us at this point, but we'll wait to talk about it until a little bit later. The second one is, and all the rest now are from the second part, the larger part of the work. This is the 25th segment. The brothers ask, there was once in Scetus an assembly during the great festival of the resurrection, at which all the fathers were gathered at the monastery, as well as the recluses and nomads and aliens who were dwelling in the vicinity of the monastery. And all the old men, or the elders, were questioned in the assembly. Which battle is most difficult and challenging for solitaries? All of them agreed to this. There is no battle which is more difficult than this one, that a person should leave his cell and move away. When this battle is defeated, all the rest shall easily be overcome. Explain to us the meaning of these words that the Father said. Dadisho then responds. Hope clings to the constancy of stillness, or shelya, in the cell. It's again that highest form of contemplative prayer. But as for departure from it, hope wanders. Therefore, when a person lives in stillness, in shelya, and loves the tranquility that is in the cell, little by little and by degrees, as he travels straight ahead according to the order of the tradition, he has hope in our Lord that he will defeat each one of the passions and acquire the virtues on account of his stillness and his ascetical labors and the grace of Christ. But if he should be disheartened and go out of and leave his cell and should wander about, he will not defeat the passions, nor also will he acquire the virtues, yet remaining in despair and utter ruin. Therefore, the fathers spoke well. There is no battle that is harder than wandering. And when this battle is defeated, all of the soldiers of the demons will be easily defeated. Quick comment is that this is probably, this particular question and answer unit is probably the central idea of the entire work. Only 2 units later, in the second part, number 27, we have a continuing question and answer on the idea of moving and changing one's location. The brothers said, Abba Theodore and Abba Luke worked for 50 years, being beguiled by their thoughts which harassed them to change locations. They said, look, we're going to change our location for the winter. When winter arrived, okay, we're going to change in the summer. And they did like this until the end of their lives. Look, will the demons be afflicting that worldly brother through thoughts to depart from his cell, just as the battle of moving, afflicting these famous fathers for a period of 50 years, that is, until their departure or death, as the story relates. Dadisho responded, yes. The devils afflict more the great fathers to wander and depart from stillness, persuading them from the greatness of wealth which they have from stillness. These fathers were being sorely deluded by the thoughts of the demons who were afflicting them to change their location. But other fathers were not being sorely deluded by the demons. However, those demons were being deluded by them in this battle of moving. So there's a back and forth between the monks and the demons. Just as also in our day, one of the great fathers, whose name was Revd, who is perfected in all the divine virtues, along with the gift given to him by God to expel the demons from demoniacs. Likewise, the battle of moving weighed heavily upon him, which did not allow him to sit at all in his cell, not even for 1 week. His disciples built for him many furnished cells in the wilderness, and he moved from one cell to another cell without ceasing. And this was done with him indeed, so that he might not be exalted by the greatness of his excellence. Nevertheless, grace kept him from wandering into the cities. Not only in the wilderness, so only in the wilderness did he wander. But he said, all of this happened to me because I have not kept the commandment of my father and teacher, who commanded me not to leave his location, not even after his departure, after his death. He was supposed to stay in the same place, the same cell. For he said to me, if you do not sit in my location after my death, wandering in places will have power over you until death. And it was so. When he was about 90 years old, this Revd was not even able to escape in this way from wandering, but he sat upon a donkey, and his disciples led him from place to place, from cell to cell in that wilderness without ceasing. The behavior was astonishing to those who saw and heard about him. But today, in our generation, those demons mock the solitaries, making them depart from their cells in this battle of moving. Therefore, the great fathers who were aware of this battle of moving and of wandering said, just as they said before, there is no more difficult battle for solitaries than this one. May Christ himself help us and rescue us from it. I'm going to move, the last two are much later in the second volume. This is from the second part, section 111. And this is a different kind of moving, and we'll apologize at the beginning for some of the content, but it's part of this ethos of these monks. The brothers asked, Abba, Abraham once said to Abba Sisos, Abba, you have become old. I guess really we both become old. Let us approach a little closer to the dwelling of people. And the old man said to him, wherever there is no woman, let us go. Why indeed were the great old men afraid of women? That's the monks asking this question. Dadisho responded, for their sake and for the sake of their disciples. For the sake of their disciples, so that they might not fall through them because of the battles of adolescence. In other words, the monks seeing these exalted elders being so loose in their behavior that they might think it's okay for themselves and for their own sake, lest they become exalted or pompous in their way of life. They will be repudiated, and also those others will fall through them. For as soon as an old man becomes prideful or exalted in himself, pompous, immediately he will commit himself into the hands of the devil of fornication, and the devil will beat him with vile thoughts of fornication and bring him to shame. And if a woman is nearby, he will fall into fornication. Therefore, the fathers judged this, that at all times they should be far away from women. For if it should happen and they become proud, it would be advantageous for them to be struck with hidden thoughts of desire and not with public acts of fornication. So then it is good that the fathers flee to the mountains and the deserts and make their dwelling at a distance from women. Okay. The last question is, the last question answer unit is number 283. There's only 291 in this section, so this is right near the end. There is not a real systematic, as I've said, order to these questions and answers, but I have discerned here and there a kind of continuing current that moves them towards certain ideas. And this last one is really almost a concluding question and answer. So the brothers say, an elder said, if you see a youth who by his own will is ascending to heaven, grab him by his foot and pull him down from there, for in this way it will help him. What does it mean by his will he ascended to heaven? That's their question. And Dadisho responded, this is similar to what Isaiah said. Before those senses cease from weakness, if the mind seeks to ascend to the cross, the wrath of God comes upon him because he began on an action that is above his level, while not first healing or maturing his senses. But some of the novice brothers are simple in this way and dare to persist and proceed in matters which are greater than their strength and their level, not wishing to learn nor being persuaded by the commandments of their fathers. But although he completed this time as required, or he had not completed this time as is required in the conobium, they dared to enter the cell. In other words, they wanted to do the 7 weeks of solitude, the greatest achievement of these monks. As it is written in the the Book of Paradise, on account of one of the brothers who, as soon as he received the monastic robe, went to confine himself, again for this ordeal and test of the 7 weeks, and said, I am a hermit. The fathers went out and forced him out of the monastery. There are some others who demand the confinement of weeks tied down while it does not help them. And other worldly ones sometimes were imitating their novitiate in higher and spiritual ways of life, although they had not yet completed the physical way of life, which is the first stage in their system. They imagined to imitate the way of the mind, which is the second stage. But therefore, they revealed their way of life to the fathers and received correction. But according to their will, they are being delivered into the hands of the demons who are mocking them. And so that is the end of the readings for the time moment. There's only 394 left to take a look at, but the translation is being edited and edited as we speak, so it'll still be a while to get that out. So I guess I'd be open to any questions on any of these, or I can make comments on individual ones, whatever it might be.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. That was marvelous and takes us into a fascinating world. And it's such an exciting find. I came across the manuscript in a catalogue, very obscure catalogue of the Bishop of Baghdad of the Church of the East. And I told David Phillips the moment I saw it that it was there. And the bishop, who became the patriarch, Markiwagis, very graciously provided us with photographs straight away.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so for this text, we owe a great deal to the recently retired Patriarch of the Church of the East. So it's nice that one has this connection with the modern Church of the East. So it'll be wonderful when the edition finally comes out. But you say it'll be some time.
Well, it's a lot. The problem isn't so much the translation, though I still have to work through lots of that.
Yes.
I've done a couple drafts,
Yes.
but it's the fact that in order to be a proper academic work, you need to make the footnotes from where they are quoting, from what message in the app. Yes. And often in some of the answers that Dadisho gives, he gives 3 or 4 different citations or references. So that in itself is a task. It will be published, we hope, sooner than later in the Fathers of the Church series, just the English translation.
Oh, very good.
The Catholic University of America Press.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I see there's a question from Hannah Lucas, so I'd like to.
Yes.